Hello everyone, welcome to the Action with podcast. Today I am here with another special guest, Jack Woehr, who has joined us from United States of America. If I talk about Jack's professional journey, then he has had an extraordinary career spanning over 4 plus decades in application development and integration, with a particular focus on IBM technologies. As an IBM champion, a member of Common America's Advisory Council, and an active open source contributor, Jack has deeply involved in shaping the IBMI and IBM Q communities. His journey in the IBM ecosystem is filled with innovation, insight, and a passion for fostering knowledge. So, today in this episode, we are going to talk about his journey as well as his contribution as an IBM expert. But before we start the discussion, I would like to thank Jack for joining us today in this episode. And now I request you to please initiate the discussion by telling us something about yourself.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. I I was exposed to computers when I was very young, but I didn't take them seriously. I was 12 years old, 11 or 12 years old when the IBM 360 came out, and clients of my father's consulting business did have those machines. So I saw them and I was able to play a little bit, with them. And I didn't really get interested in computers until the 1970s. I had done a lot of other things. And uh, a friend of mine had the game Pong, where the ball goes back and forth. And he showed me that, and I sat there for 4 hours playing Pong, and I was kind of hooked. So the computer games, as simple as they were, sort of got me started. Um, and this was the time when people were building their own computers. And anyway, I fiddled with them, and then I started doing embedded control. And then I got access to larger machines like VAX VMS and Unix machines and IBM PC DOS and stuff like that. And worked in early worked in was very much involved with open source very early on. Open source is a funny word because all source was open until the PC era. Didn't mean you could distribute it, but if you had a mainframe operating system, you had the source to it because there was no internet. They couldn't log into your system and fix things. You had to be able to be on the phone with someone and make changes. Someone at IBM, they say, try changing this and recompile the kernel for your mainframe and reload it. So it was in the PC era that source began to be closed. So I'd always been involved with open source. Though I wasn't much involved with mainframes, I was involved with workstations and then Solaris and OS/2 and Windows NT. And in 1994, I started contracting at IBM for OS/2, and that's when I really met the big systems. IBM VM, IBM MVS, which later became, right when I was there, became OS 390, and then it became ZOS later. And I was startled by the IBM systems. They seemed so old-fashioned, but at the same time so modern. And it took me a while to resolve this contradiction. And of course, as a younger programmer, um, it was interesting to see code that was that old. I saw code that was 35 years old, and I said, wow, mature code. I've never seen this before because in the world I'd been in, everything is new. This is the 1980s and 90s and everything. You changed the whole world every few weeks, and people abandoned platforms, and there were all these different operating systems that are now gone. BEOS and Solaris was very common, and um, other Unix operating systems, Santa Cruz Operation Unix, and now there's just a few operating systems and everything's sort of settled down. But at that time, the idea of mature code and that there were platforms like IBM platforms in which the code was really, really tested and really mature was kind of like, it was an eye opener to me, and I became fascinated by this. And I sort of wandered into the IBM enterprise systems world and ended up on IBMI. And that's kind of my journey to IBM systems.
Okay. So yeah, with this introduction, it is pretty much clear that throughout your professional journey, you have explored almost every areas or domain related to IBM. So here I want to ask a bit about evaluation of the technologies. So how has the landscape of the application development and the system integration changed since you began? And what do you believe are the key element if we talk about the future to stay ahead?
That's a really good question, and it's a question that has a lot of fear behind it. There's a lot of
Yeah.
fear in the development community nowadays. Here comes AI. Is this going to take our jobs? Well, it can write code. Well, it writes code, but you better watch it. If it writes a loop, you still have to look at it. If it writes a simple loop. So, first of all, I wouldn't be too worried about that. It's going to do stuff. But I I was on the MongoDB podcast a few months ago, and a similar question was asked, and I said, "Well, in my career, a lot of stuff I used to do by hand is now automated."
Yeah.
I started at the time when sometimes to program a computer, you entered the program one hex byte at a time into memory. We used to write stuff like that sometimes in DOS debug, for instance. I knew a guy who wrote a whole operating system that way, and we'll talk about him probably a little later as one of the fellows who influenced me. And we don't do this anymore. We have compilers, we have linters,
Right.
we have debuggers. A lot of these things weren't there, and a lot of stuff that we spent hours and hours and days on 40 years ago, we do not now. It's automated. It's just one more thing. We are surfers and we're riding a wave, and you just have to stay on top of the wave. The People ask what programmers do, and I say, we learn for a living. Everything's changing all the time. So if you ever stop learning, your surfboard's going to fall and the wave's going to take you down. So that's, if you want to stay ahead, just, you have to keep learning. You can't, it's not enough that you do your job. It has never been enough that you do your job. Friends of mine who said, development's just a job for me. Eventually, they found they were, off in some corner maintaining something old because they were not interested. For whatever reason, maybe they had some other interest in their life, but they lost
Yeah.
interest. If you lose interest and you stop learning, you're doomed. Not doomed, but you're not going to be first rate anymore, and you have to
Correct.
put extra hours in every day, just pursuing, chasing the will of the wisp through the marsh, chasing this light, this light going on ahead. So,
Okay. So on this point, I want to ask you two questions. One is, if in year 2024, if someone wants to start their career in the mainframe industry, so is it okay for them, or would you like to suggest anything here? Because most of the people still looking it as a legacy system which is about to end. So what is your thought on this?
well, when you're starting your career,
Hmm.
especially when you're starting your career, it's really good to work with the older systems because they are the history of how we got to where we are today. It wasn't
Right.
until the 1990s that I met programmers who didn't know how a computer worked. I had to know how a computer worked electrically because
Yes.
they were not reliable when I started. You had to fix them. You had to check things with an oscilloscope. You had to see if all the
Yes.
address lines were firing. And now I meet people who do not know how a transistor works, do not know how a computer works, but they've been through courses and they've learned Java or they've learned whatever, and they get started, and that's fine. I don't want to criticize that, and because it's so complicated nowadays, there's so much in software. Any way you can get in the door, do it. If you go to a boot camp for HTML and full stack web development, it doesn't matter. Take a Java course, go into the mainframe and take a course in mainframe assembler. However you get in the door, do it. But once you're in, look around and realize you're in a giant museum with lots and lots of history to it. Digital binary computers were invented in the 1940s. It's coming up on 100 years before too long that they've been around. And there was a lot of evolution, and a lot of the reason things are the way they are is that people made certain decisions. There were forks in the road. To a large extent, PCs and Unix and Mac and Windows went one way, and uh, it was kind of actually the VAX VMS way and Unix way, and then
Yeah.
IBM mainframes went the other way. PCs, Unix, Linux, everything is stream based. Mainframe systems are record based. PCs are optimized for interactive sessions. Mainframes are optimized for batch jobs. And all these decisions were made for reasons, and the reasons are valid. And these systems are not invalid just because they're different than your mobile phone.
Yeah.
They are part of computing, and as has been pointed out by Byron Smith in his wonderful podcast, A Millennial Looks at IBM Mainframes. 90% of the world's commerce still runs on these systems. So you may not stay, if you start in mainframes, you may not stay in mainframes your whole life, but I have not stayed where I started ever. And
Yes.
I have moved from place to place, learning and learning and learning. And you will learn in mainframes, you will learn on Linux, you will learn on Mac, you will learn on PCs, you will learn in quantum computing. Uh, there's just a world of it out there. Be like a bug eating his way through a radish. Just start eating and just
Yeah.
eat your way around till you've eaten the whole radish.
Right. And you know what? I was about to ask you the next question, which is related to the technologies. Like, what all technologies would you like to recommend? But you have already answered the things that yes, you can do the boot camps related to Java as well as HTML, web development, full stack development. So, yeah, that is, I think, a great advice that if you are starting your career with mainframe, so it's always recommended, as you just mentioned, that always start with other technologies as well. Like, you can start the career, but there should be other things also that you can learn along with mainframe, so it would give you more benefits.
Well, accrue to your benefits. All computing, all digital binary computing works the same way. Computing
Correct.
itself, the thought of programming, all works the same way. I once had the privilege when interviewing for Dr. Dobbs' journal to talk to Donald Knuth, who is the dean of American computer science. He's quite old now, but he's still alive and he still writes. Um, but he wrote the basic books on algorithms, and he said there've always been programmers. We just have very fancy hardware nowadays. It's a mindset. It's a way
Right.
of approaching problems, of decomposing problems and being able to break them down into steps. That's the skill, that and the ability to continually learn. That's what we do. It doesn't matter where you start. All these systems, they have all sorts of different rules and all sorts of different moving parts to them, but they all work the same way, like automobiles. They all basically work the same way.
Okay. All right. So let's talk bit about the recognition, which is for IBM Champion, because since 2021, you have been recognized as an IBM Champion every year since 2021. So here I would like to ask you one question, like, what does it mean to you, this recognition? And how do you feel your contributions have impacted the IBMI as well as IBM Q communities?
That's a pretty broad question, Amit. Well,
Yeah.
all technology companies nowadays have champions programs because
Yes.
they, there was a time when people sat down and studied in books or in universities and learned how to use the systems, and the systems were much more limited than they are today. But nowadays, technology has grown so much that there's almost no way for people to become comfortable with a different company's product, and there's a new one they have to look at every month, unless there's a community around it that's willing to help and answer basic questions. How do I get started? I tried this, it doesn't work. I do not understand what they're trying to tell me in the documentation here. You have to have a community around it. It doesn't matter whether it's a firewall or a database, whatever product you're using, an operating system, there has to be a community around it. And IBM, of course, is
Yes.
the largest and oldest, broadest view of business computing of any company in the world. So every time I go to a tech exchange, I meet someone whose career depends upon some IBM product I've never heard of.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, I never heard of that. Okay, yeah, they got that too. Okay, and that happened again, at Tech Exchange here. So IBM very much encourages people to participate in their Champions program, and we're people, as you know, you yourself, people who like to help other people get themselves oriented in the tech space of
Correct.
IBM systems that we have become, we've become expert in them. We like them. We like IBM's approach. We're positive about it. We recognize the flaws. Not, not every, the batter doesn't hit every baseball out of the stadium every time. And IBM is no different than any other in that way. Well, IBM made a mistake here, but here's how you get around it. Um, here's how you talk to IBM when you want to influence them, when you want to ask them a question. Learning how to deal with IBM itself as an organization is an art that takes years and years of study. Believe me. Um,
Yeah.
learning sometimes how to pay your license fees can take you months to figure out who do I pay to? It's a very big organization. So IBM champions are people who've gotten familiar with this and like to help other people become um, oriented in their system. What it does for me um, is a little more abstruse. It's part of the community of champions themselves. Once you're a champion, the other champions know you're there, and you talk to them, and
Correct.
you get to know some of the best experts in the world. And I'm not expert in everything about IBM, and I
Yes.
need help too. Still, and so it's great having direct access to all these other people. And then again, your customers are impressed. One of the companies I consult through, ProCern Technology Solutions, is very proud that they have on staff one of the, 100 or so IBM champions who are in the IBMI space. And it's a sales point for them, so there's some commercial benefit to it, and your words tend to carry weight. So you got to watch what you say.
Yes.
Got to be careful that your advice is good, and it makes me strive harder. It makes me try harder. When I give someone an answer and they say, "Well, this is an IBM champion answering me," I do a lot of research. I spend my time clicking around the web and reading all the documentation, because reading IBM documentation is a skill that doesn't happen
Yes.
overnight. The IBM
That's correct.
documentation takes years to understand, and I'm good at reading IBM documentation. So when I give an answer, I carefully research the answer, because I know they're going to say an IBM champion gave me a stupid answer, and I don't want that to happen. So it makes me work harder. It reminds me that I'm carrying on my shoulders the reputation of a community every time I give
Okay.
someone an answer on the web or something.
All right. Okay. Okay, so let's talk bit about the trends, because as a member of Common America's Advisory Council, uh, like you are contributing a lot, right? So what are some of the key trends or shift you are seeing in this particular domain of IBMI community, and how you are helping them to shape it throughout your journey?
Well, we there's a saying from a science fiction book that a lot of us read when we were young, and they taught we they joke about Caesar, who was the ruler of the Roman Empire, and the joke is that Caesar never knows what's going on.
Okay.
And Andy Grove of Intel said something similar. He always said the CEO is the last to know. So Common America Advisory Council and Common Europe Advisory Council are there to help IBM know what's going on in the small IBMI shops, because otherwise they might not know. They might not know how decisions they make affect hundreds and hundreds of small customers. So they want us to be there to tell them what we would like them to prioritize and what we think is important as they go. Sometimes, many times, people submit ideas to the IBM idea page. Sometimes IBM developers have ideas about how direction they'd like to take the system, and they want feedback from people who have their roots out in the larger IBMI community. And Common America's Advisory Council and Europe Advisory Council is particularly about the small shops. IBM has another group called the Large Users Group, which is the
Yeah.
big banks and stuff that use, sometimes hundreds of LPARs of IBMI. But we are the ones who represent the small shops down to, and literally we call them mom and pop shops. One of
Okay.
my customers is a little company that sells things like artificial flowers and baskets for decoration, and it was started by and mom and pop are still there, and
Okay.
they don't understand IBMI. They've just always had people to help them.
Yeah.
So it goes all the way down to there. What affects them? What is this going to do to them if you change the operating system? Is their application still going to work? So there's a lot of that. There are specific directions that are becoming more and more important in IBMI, and I personally try to be an advocate in that area because I have some expertise in that. One is when the questions of, TLS and security and stuff like that come up. I have some expertise in that, so I always advocate for what I feel are the most important points when those subjects come under discussion. The other thing that I am very sensitive to is the IBMI support for multiple languages, multiple human languages.
Yeah.
And when requests come in, because I understand that aspect of the platform, when requests come in about that, I end up being one of the members on the team who is the most vocal in terms of advocating that because IBMI growth, a lot of it, it's growing faster in other parts of the world than the United States, and we have to be very, very sensitive to the language needs of various communities that are using the IBMI platform. So I very much advocate for that, even though theoretically we're talking about, IBMI in North and South America. I still, I'm there. And when the question of do we support this facility in this language, and someone has written in to IBM and saying they're having trouble with it, I take a good look at it and see whether they've misunderstood the platform and they're not using the right CCSID, or whether there really is a
Yeah.
problem, that there's inadequate language support for a particular language, something like that. So that's one of my interests.
Okay. All right. Okay, so now we will take another question which is related to your contributions. So you have been an active open source contributor, even developing Ublu, an open source language. So could you please share a story behind that Ublu and its impact on the IBMI development?
Well, one of the reasons I'm in IBMI is that I encountered I was fascinated by ZVM, and I was working with
Mhm.
ZVM some, and I was, well, working in a company that also had IBMI, and I was mostly working on the OS2 connection and Windows NT connection to their IBMI platform, and I suddenly found IBMI. I had not encountered that while contracting at IBM. The place I was at, they were mostly mainframe, and uh, so I tried IBMI, and I played with it for I played with I Rex, because Rex is there on the platform. A lot of people don't know Rex is there, but Rex is on IBMI, and I'd seen that on the IBM. I played with their C++, and I looked at ILE because they have the LE environment on mainframes. I said, "Oh, here's
Yeah.
ILE. It's the same thing as LE on the mainframes, basically." And um, the language environment, and oh, they've got Java. Oh, wait, they've got this library that allows you to remote control the platform through Java. You can actually take the Java code and put it on your Linux box and remote control like magic the IBMI. So I didn't really care what IBMI did at first. I just knew that it was fun to take this Java library and put it on my Linux box and be able to remotely control the IBMI. And I started writing little programs that did this. Well, I ended up, working with the IBMI space, and I got very good at using this. I was better at using Java to remotely control the IBMI than I was at basic IBMI operations. That was my doorway into IBMI.
Okay.
And so I began to really learn IBMI and learn what it was used for and help customers and stuff. But still, I would often solve problems because this was before there was a lot of open source stuff. The only open source stuff there was on IBMI mostly was the JT Open Java library. They had Java, and they had this open source class library, and I began to participate very heavily in that. And Chris Smith, who was no longer with IBM, encouraged me a lot, and I became a contributor to the JT Open Library. And that was fascinating to me. And I was participating already in supporting this platform that I only very dimly understood. But
Okay.
but I understood this one aspect of it, so I tended to solve problems like that. So as time moved on and I became more and more involved in the platform, and still there wasn't a lot of open source on the platform. That came kind of late in my exposure to the platform. I would I kept writing routines, and then eventually I wove them into a language in the course of an engagement, a very deep engagement with a couple of customers. I became very, I finally wove this into an interpretive language. So basically, Ublu is a JT Open interpreter and a
Okay.
Java interpreter. You can write interpretive Java in it and stuff like that. So as Ublu matured, I stopped writing stuff into the core and started writing stuff as extensions in Ublu itself. And Ublu expanded to be about twice its size on the basis of extensions, which were just, Ublu code written in Ublu and Java interpretively that you load when you want to use them, these extensions. And it became a very useful language, especially ProCern Technology Solutions uses it extensively in its monitoring. And there are people there who are better at writing Ublu than I am. I,
Okay.
they just, I wrote the language, but they're better at writing the code. They've gotten used to it. It's not a beautiful language. You know what I mean? It's kind of, I just wrote it very quickly for, it works very well. And and it does amazing things, but as a language, the design is really just very clumsy. I just threw it together. The guy who wrote PHP has said much the same thing. They've talked about PHP, and the interviewer asked him, he kind of very gently sort of told him his language was kind of clunky. He said, well, I wrote it 20, this is an interview around 2016. And he said, I wrote it 20 years ago and I still can't write a parser. He said, I still haven't learned how to write a parser correctly. So that's the kind of same thing with me. It's not an LALR parser. There is no Antler grammar for Ublu. It was all written by hand in
Okay.
Java, the parser, just by hand. So it's a very useful language. It's very powerful, and I have a small but dedicated user base, and I don't expect great growth. Because what happened in the meantime is, a lot of stuff came in. There's Python, there's Perl, there's PHP, there's Node, there monitoring systems like Manzan that Jesse Gorzinski maintains. There's all these tools that weren't there when I wrote this. So people don't necessarily have to go through the pain of learning my crazy language, Ublu, but the people who did find it does everything. It just you can do everything except the dedicated service tools with it. It's just because JT Open is amazing, and I'm one of the maintainers of JT Open, which is now fully open source, and that project is headed again by Jesse Gorzinski, and I'm
Okay.
still a contributor to JT Open, to the basic source. I hope that
Okay.
answered your question. I took you around the block a lot.
No, no, it answered all those questions, and I think it is quite clear to everyone like who are interested to learn about the OPU. So thanks for the answer. And now, like, although you have a very great exposure on the writing section as well, because you were contributing as an editor for Dr. Dobbs Journal for 20 years. So, could you please share a bit about that experience, that writing experience? Like, what was your approach to discussing the cutting edge tech topics with a wide audience of the tech enthusiast?
That was an amazing experience. I mean, and
Mhm.
I'd be a different person if it hadn't happened. I got to, I always say that if you can't be a genius, hang around with geniuses, and some of
Yeah,
it may rub off. I got
correct.
to interview Charles H. Moore, Chuck Moore, the inventor of the fourth programming language, which was really the basis of my career originally. And I got to interview Dr. Lotfi Zadeh, who invented fuzzy set theory, which became fuzzy logic as they use in the cameras, and William Kahn, who designed the math for basically designed floating point math for all computers. The RFC that he wrote became the basis of the Intel 8087 coprocessor in the early PC, and that math is still the basis of how we do floating point math to this day. I got to interview all these people, uh, people all over the world who had made significant. I told you that I had. uh, spoken with the dean of American Computer Science, and one of the things you learn is, when you talk to the graduate students and you ask them a question, they make your head spin. But when you talk to the people, uh, uh, like Professor Sir Anthony Leggett at University of Indiana, I think he's retired now, who got the Nobel Prize for superfluidity. When you talk to people like that and you ask them questions, why does this work? How does this work? They answer very simply. The people who really, really understand it. So I got very, very simple answers to what I thought were very complex questions from the people who had spent their whole lives studying certain things. And that was really, I can't describe how much that helped me in my career, being able to talk to these brilliant people, just as this nosy little guy with a tape recorder, asking people questions, often on the phone, sometimes in person, interviewing these people and then writing it down and being very careful as I transcribed the interview to edit myself out of the interview and just let them talk. And
Okay.
that's another important skill I learned about writing, is if you're an interviewer, a lot of interviewers, fancy up their own words when they print the interview, and it
Right.
was important to edit your own personality out of it and let the person you're interviewing shine. So
Okay.
yeah, you have that skill.
Thank
You've
you.
learned that.
Okay. So, like Jack, even though we have various topics to discuss, but just because of the limitation of time, I would like to ask my last question, and
Okay.
it is bit different because like we all know and we all look towards you as a mentor and as a coach who are consistently sharing and inspiring many who is consistently sharing the information and inspiring many young generation. But here I would like to ask you, like, who are some of the people you credit as a key influences in your professional growth, and what unique qualities did they bring into your journey?
Well, that's a really good question. There's so many people, because I did not learn this in university, and people say you're self-taught. No, I'm not self-taught. I was taught by lots and lots of people. They just didn't get paid for it. It's kind of what happened. Chuck Moore, the inventor of the fourth programming language, was a great inspiration to me. He was the one who convinced me very early on that if simplicity may not be the only programming virtue, but it is the greatest of virtues. The simpler you can keep things, the easier they are to maintain and the easier they are for you to understand. Factoring, breaking down your task into small blocks, building the building blocks of your solution before you try to build the solution. The approach of writing, basically programming by writing yourself effectively in whatever language you're doing, a domain specific language, and then writing your application in that domain specific language. That's always been my programming approach. That's what Ublu is. That's what a lot of simple Python programs are that I write. I write little functions that are the building blocks, and then I write the program out of the building blocks and stuff. So Charles Moore was a tremendous influence on me. John Erickson, the editor of Dr. Dobbs' journal, he was not himself. He was a brilliant technologist, but he was not specialized in any language or anything like this. He was basically a magazine editor. But at the same time, he had such a sensitivity for technology and how it affected people and how it was migrating. He saw immediately, as soon as the web came in, that magazines were going to go away. And he
Yes.
reshaped Dr. Dobbs to be an online publication starting immediately as soon as the web came in. He said the paper is just going to be, advertising for the online publication, anything we print on paper. And he saw that. And unfortunately, he became ill in the 2010s, and the magazine was handed over to someone else, and it didn't do very well, and then it was gone. There's so many people. Again, people I worked with. There was a fellow named Stephen Sarnes, and Stephen Sarnes was an electrical engineer, and he lives in Salida, Colorado, and I worked for him for 5 years at an embedded control company. And Stephen was a cranky, cranky boss. He was not
Okay.
always pleasant to work with, but but I'd come in with great ideas and I'd say, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this fabulous thing? And then we could service all this market. And he said, we're not a big company. We're just doing this. I found a solution that makes 40% of the market happy. And we can make a living doing that. And getting me to learn that there were practical business constraints on computing enthusiasm. Stephen Sarnes was very influential to me in that. And there's any number of people, I hesitate to name them. All these people I interviewed, all
Yeah.
these the people I've worked with. There's a young fella. I think of him as a young fella. He's in his 50s now, but to me that's a young fella still. Nathan Lipke, who works for Salesforce. I hired him as a younger programmer, and we've been friends ever since. Absolutely brilliant technologist, and his I've always been one who could be carried away by his enthusiasms, and Nathan is a very, very practical person, and he'll say, "Well, Jack, and he'll explain to me why that isn't going to happen, and why this wonderful thing that I think could happen is not going to happen." And then all the people I've gotten to know in quantum computing, Blake Johnson, Luciano Bejo, at the IBM Quantum uh, 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 IBM Quantum Research and Development Project that led to Qiskit, and all the people I've gotten to know through Qiskit, Matthew Trainus, Jake Lishman, the people on the Open Chasm are lately been a great influence on me as I sit there. It's very interesting to be in your 70s and being sitting and listening as a
Correct.
student at the feet of people in their 20s and 30s who know much more about the subject than you do. So it's a very
Yes.
refreshing experience, and it keeps me young to be constantly learning from younger people who have gone much farther with this because they started farther on than I started. This stuff was already, they've come into a
Correct.
world where quantum computing is a thing. It's really there. And all these people, Jerry Champlin, of Absolute Performance, uh, an ADHD businessman, who would want a different project every day, but at the same time, his mind was constantly flashing with ideas, and to be partaking of these ideas. There's so many people. I feel like I'm slighting some of them, not to name them all, but there's hundreds of people. Everybody you meet,
Yes.
you learn from everybody you meet. I'm learning from you,
Agree.
Amit. I've learned, it's amazing. You have a tremendous amount of understanding of how this whole community is put together, how the community of technologists is put together. And this is your study. I clearly, your destiny is in managing large teams of programmers, because I think you will be very good at that as your career matures.
Thank you. All right. So thank you so much, Jack, for joining us in this episode and for sharing all your expertise with us. I hope you also enjoyed the discussion. So thank you once again.
Well, I certainly did, and thank you for having me, Amit, and best of luck to all your viewers.
Thank you.